Welcome to Meet the Press Now. Happy Friday. I'm Chuck Todd. We begin with the breaking news out of the Justice Department. In the wake of former President Trump formally announcing his 2024 candidacy on Tuesday, 72 hours later, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced the appointment of a special counsel to take over two criminal investigations he was overseeing that are tied to the former president. Those investigations include the criminal investigation into classified documents found at the former president's Florida residence at Mar-a-Lago, as well as what Garland called key aspects of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Garland said that the special counsel would not be looking at anyone who was present at the Capitol during the riot, which, of course, Trump was not. This was about the lead up to the insurrection. Here's who will be leading these politically fraught investigations. His name's Jack Smith. He's a former federal prosecutor who now serves as a prosecutor at The Hague. But he'll begin in his new role as special counsel immediately, as soon as he gets home from The Hague. As I noted, Garland's announcement comes less than 72 hours, actually, after former President Trump announced his third run for the White House, which Garland specifically cited as a key factor in his decision.
It is in the public interest to appoint a special prosecutor to independently manage an investigation and prosecution. Based on recent developments, including the former president's announcement that he is a candidate for president in the next election, and the sitting president's stated intention to be a candidate as well, I have concluded that it is in the public interest to appoint a special counsel.
In a statement released shortly after the special counsel's appointment, a spokesperson for former President Trump said, "This is totally expected political stunt by a feckless, politicized, weaponized Biden Department of Justice." So, not much of a statement there. This legal development for the former president comes as he faces a number of political headwinds, including a disappointing midterms last week and a lackluster presidential announcement this week. And it also comes as some Republicans are considering challenging Trump for the Republican Party's nomination. And that includes Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence, who I interviewed yesterday at the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, for the Sunday episode of Meet the Press. In our interview, I asked him to weigh in on this very issue of whether the former president committed a crime. Here was his answer. Do you think the president committed a criminal act in fomenting the insurrection? Do you think a crime was committed?
Well, I don't know if it is criminal to listen to bad advice from lawyers. The truth is, what the president was repeating is what he was hearing from that gaggle of attorneys around him. And, you know, presidents, just as like all of us that have served in public life, you have to rely on your team. You have to rely on the credibility of the people around you. And so, you know, as time goes on, I hope we can move beyond this, beyond that prospect. And this is really a time when our country ought to be healing. And frankly, the Justice Department's actions have been exposed from during our administration, where FBI agents were advancing political agendas, falsifying records, using what came to be found out to be opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic Party, the so-called dossier. And then this past summer, when we see the Justice Department execute a search warrant against the personal residence of a former president of the United States, I think the American people, join me in hoping we can move past this contention.
But is he above the law? I mean, if he violated the law, should he be held to the same standard that I would be held to?
Chuck, no one's above the law. But I would hope the Justice Department would give careful consideration before they take any additional steps in this matter.
There's a lot more on that answer in our back and forth on that. You'll see more of that on Sunday. But let's break down this. In fact, he was very direct against the Attorney General, thinking that there were ways to avoid a search warrant being executed there. We'll get more into that later. But to break all this down right now, I'm going to bring in Julia Ainsley. She covers the Department of Justice for us. Vaughn Hilliard has the latest reaction from Trump world. I'm also joined by former U.S. Attorney and an NBC News legal analyst, Carol Lamb. Julia, let's start with Jack Smith. Who is he?
Well, he's someone whose name might not be at the tip of the tongue of many people who would have been looking to try to find either a strong Republican or a strong Democrat, because not many people even know who he is. And so in that way, he kind of has a little bit of independence, just that he's not a name that a lot of people know. But he's someone who began his career in New York in the district attorney's office. He did move up through the Justice Department ranks. He was in the Eastern District of New York. He ended up in Tennessee, both appointed by Democratic presidents, Clinton and then Obama.
We don't have any record of him ever being appointed by a Republican to any.
No, he was acting U.S. attorney in Tennessee in early 2017, so that would have been under Trump, but he did not stay on in that position. He was never formally appointed. So that's a good point. But most recently, he was appointed by the European Union to oversee war crime trials in The Hague, specifically related to Kosovo. So he has an international reputation, but I do think that's a good point, and that might be something that we see Republicans point out.
So clarify this. If this special counsel recommends charges, it's his call? It's no longer Merrick Garland's call?
Well, it's interesting. What Merrick Garland said today was that he has prosecutorial power. So I started thinking, is that different than Robert Mueller? But it will still be Merrick Garland at the helm. The Attorney General has the ultimate decision-making power throughout any U.S. attorney's office to step in and decide to step into a case. But this will be his recommendation to Merrick Garland. And should he decide that the investigation turned into a prosecution and Merrick Garland disagrees, Merrick Garland would then have to explain that to Congress. If it does proceed into a prosecution, Jack Smith would oversee those prosecutions. It's a lot of power. I still do, though, have a question about whether or not he would do a full report like what we saw in the Mueller investigation that was so critical.
And these are two separate investigations. They don't overlap at all, do they?
They don't overlap, but you know what they have in common? They have Donald Trump in common. And there have been so many investigations we've talked about over the years where we thought, but could Trump actually sidestep this? For example, Robert Mueller's investigation. We learned a lot about Russia's interference in the 2016 election, but Trump was not prosecuted as a result. But in these specific circumstances, it is the former president, now new candidate, who took those records to Mar-a-Lago, and it is the former president who's being investigated, resulting in January 6th. Merrick Garland was specific to say it has nothing to do with the people who went to the Capitol. Right. It is people who tried to stop the certification of the election, which in this case could be former President Trump.
Since the former president was telegraphing his likely announcement, and we know for a long time there were some that had recommended a special counsel from the beginning, and Merrick Garland had dismissed that for quite some time. Considering the speed with which he found somebody to take this, one assumes he's been thinking about this for weeks.
Yeah, perhaps that he was waiting to see this announcement and that would be the triggering point, that he didn't see it as necessary for a current sitting administration to be investigating a former president. You might not need a special counsel for that, but for someone investigating a new candidate, he might see that being the time. And we're seeing that reaction from the Trump world now, that they are very fired up about this, saying, look, it must be the timing. But Garland was very transparent. Of course it's the timing of that announcement.
And the only thing that made sense for Trump's announcement, this is a terrible idea politically for him. It doesn't even make any sense financially from a campaign finance. He's actually making it harder for him to use money, his super PAC money. This only motivation was to try to disrupt Garland's investigation, it seems like.
Yeah, you mean to make that announcement when he did so early. Yeah, I mean, that could very much be part of the case, that if you're trying to do the math and figure out when you might be indicted and when you should announce, I guess those are the considerations you take into account. But yeah, we can see, too, that it's hard for them to split this narrative that they would be upset about a special counsel being appointed when they control the Justice Department, but they're also upset about a special counsel being appointed when their opponent does.
Right. With Trump world, the simplest explanation is always the answer. Let me go to Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, I know we got a statement from them, but in some ways, this is exactly what they expected, right? This is what Trump, I guess, wanted, or at least wanted to force the Justice Department's hand by announcing quickly.
Right, and actually he just talked with Fox News just a bit ago. They posted an article online in which, to what you and Julie were just talking about, he explicitly said, quote, I announce and they appoint a special prosecutor, essentially making the case that one caused the other. This is a moment, though, where he is going to yet again work to make himself a political martyr here. We heard him the other night at his announcement speech there at Mar-a-Lago refer to himself as a victim, the focus point of investigations. And let's be clear here. He is going to try to use this for political purposes. As one of the other quotes that he delivered to Fox News was, quote, "The Republican Party has to stand up and fight." This is a way in which he has been able to consolidate power quite effectively in the past. Of course, back in August, when the search warrant was executed at Mar-a-Lago, you heard the likes of Rick Scott and Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, as well as House members from Jim Jordan to Marjorie Taylor Greene come out in strong defense, even per your conversation there with the former vice president. Even Mike Pence issued a statement at the time, and just here today, Mike Pence is now calling into question the Department of Justice's decision to go through with that search warrant execution. This is Donald Trump, who is trying to use these investigations as a means to justify his political relevance. And for a great share of this Republican Party electorate, it's worked in the past, and the hope for Donald Trump is that it works again, because it could lead to another Republican nomination for president.
Yeah, look, the whole, like I said, the only thing that made sense about his announcement was trying to force the Justice Department's hand legally. Because, Vaughn, is there any plans to travel? Is there any rally on the books? Does he have more than 3 endorsements from members of Congress? It's the strangest rollout of an presidential announcement I've ever seen, which is why it feels as if the only motivation was this legal issue.
He has nothing on the books at this point. I pressed multiple advisors to Donald Trump when I was down in West Palm Beach here this week about whether they would be traveling to Georgia ahead of the December 6th runoff. And the answer was, we've got nothing quite yet on the books. And there's questions about whether he'd be willing to put his own political capital on the line yet again for Herschel Walker. If you walk into Georgia here in the final 3 weeks and throw up a loss, it calls into question for the Republican electorate, one that may even be sympathetic to your role in these investigations and maybe even feels like you are a political target. But as soon as you are losing elections consistently, that is when you're talking about the power at play here as individuals in the Republican Party are trying to choose who their nominee is going to be. They can believe you're a political martyr and the subject of unfair investigations. But if you're losing elections, that could make you more volatile to an uprising within your own party.
Well, look, the important thing you noted was this has worked for him in the past. Let's see if this works for him after the beating him and his candidates took in the midterms. And I think that's an open question. Let me bring in Carol Lamb here. So, Carol, in the timing of the special counsel, there were people that thought he should have named a special counsel almost from the get-go, just because of how fraught. You knew Trump was a possible candidate anyway. But it's pretty clear that he wanted to wait till he felt like he had to, till he was an announced candidate. Would you have done it any differently?
I don't think I would have done it any differently, Chuck, because I think that Merrick Garland knows that the way the special counsel statute is written now, it's not like the old independent counsel statute. Merrick Garland knows that at the end of the day, he still retains ultimate decision-making authority over whether charges are brought against the former president. And so to jump through the hoops of doing a special counsel, which involves a whole different set of parameters, it changes everybody's positions on the prosecutorial team. He didn't think it was necessarily important to do that while the former president was just the former president. But you are absolutely right. By announcing himself to be a candidate for the presidency, he forced Merrick Garland's hand. There is no way that Merrick Garland could continue in this investigation as an appointee of President Biden and still maintain any appearance of not having a conflict of interest. So he forced his hand. Merrick Garland, remember, has never officially said that Donald Trump is actually a target of the investigations, but this makes it very, very clear that he is.
So, Carol, I'm sure you've had to take over a case in the middle of a case in the past. What kind of, how much, it's inevitable there's a delay. How much of a delay?
There is a delay in one sense, in that the person now, Jack Smith, has to get caught up on all of the facts. But there's still a lot of work to do. an investigation is never really completed. Things keep happening even as you're investigating. So Jack Smith, with his experience, he knows how to get caught up on facts very, very quickly. He knows how to ask all the right questions. And let me emphasize that his prior experience as the chief of public integrity at the Department of Justice is so important, because they are the unit that investigates politicians who are being accused of doing corrupt things. And that means he has the experience to understand what it means to do a criminal investigation in a very political atmosphere. So a lot of human judgment has to occur here. It's not going to take him that long to get caught up, and the investigation still has a ways to go.
To me, the most difficult part of getting somebody to do this, if you're Merrick Garland, is look at what Trump did to Robert Mueller, and look at the public attacks that he was able to surface against Robert Mueller. How do you prepare Jack Smith for this?
Well, look at Jack Smith's history. Look at the kinds of things that he's done. You don't go and live overseas to prosecute international cases in the international criminal courts because you're afraid of high-profile or difficult cases. There are people who serve the public in this manner, and we should be very grateful to them for being willing to do it.
Carol Lamb, former U.S. Attorney, Julia Ainsley, Justice correspondent, and Vaughn Hilliard covering the Trump world for us. Thank you all for getting us started. We should note the White House is currently holding its daily briefing right now, and Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said moments ago that the White House was not given a heads up by the Justice Department that it was appointing a special counsel, that they learned the way we learned. Up next, at a time when Donald Trump's political power is arguably at its weakest ever, why are Republicans still acting like he's as strong as ever? Plus, House Democrats usher in a new era with a major shakeup in leadership. I'm going to talk to Congressman Jim Clyburn, the only member of Pelosi's top leadership team who wants to stay in the leadership team. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we said, the DOJ's announcement today that it's naming a special counsel comes after former President Trump announced his run for president earlier this week, the fallout of which was probably not what Trump had hoped for. Not much buzz, no big name endorsements, no fat campaign checks. What we have seen are multiple stories of prominent Republican donors who fueled his last two presidential runs, passing on him. And yet Republicans, even some presidential hopefuls, who are going to have to defeat him in a primary, still seem afraid of distancing themselves too much from the former president. House Republicans, whose narrow majority can arguably be blamed, at least in part, on voters' clear dislike of Trump, are going full steam ahead with some of Trump's priorities. Republicans in the House Judiciary Committee today telegraphed potential investigations into the border and the Justice Department's handling of the Mar-a-Lago probe. And that comes after yesterday, the two Republican congressmen who are in line to chair the House Oversight and House Judiciary Committees held a press conference to announce an investigation into Hunter Biden, an action ripped straight from Mr. Trump's 2020 campaign playbook. And despite their narrow majority in the House, and despite being rejected by voters in toss-up districts, Republicans seem to be proceeding as if they flipped 50 seats last week. Earlier this week, Republican leader and Speaker hopeful Kevin McCarthy said as much.
The one thing I know in Washington, they don't hand the gavels out in small, medium, and large size. It's one size gavel with the ability to subpoena and hold this government accountable, secure this border, fight to make us energy independent, give parents a say in their kids' education, and actually look what the DOJ is doing, what the DHS is doing, and others. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Well, joining me now is someone who used to be a member of the House Republican Conference. It's former Florida Congressman Francis Rooney. Congressman, it is good to see you. I'm hearing Kevin McCarthy and Jim Jordan and James Comer talk about what they want to do, and I'm thinking, are House Republicans in 2022 about to go down the same road as House Republicans of 2010? And all that did was help Barack Obama win re-election in 2012. And with a focus, sort of not in that direction that might have helped them actually win all of the corners of power in 2012. What do you see in these first few days?
Well, it's not super encouraging. For the asymmetry that you described is not super encouraging, that while Trump buried us with these elections, so many people are still currying favor and hiding under Trump's penumbra. And I don't see the value in that. And to keep hearkening back on the past, I think Hunter Biden probably has done some bad things from what I've read. But the American people want solutions to inflation, to our loss of stature in the world when the people won't even call the president back like MBS. I think they want stability. They want oil prices to go down, but they have to go down through the free market, not through ridiculous outreaches like the Biden administration has perpetrated, Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. But the American people want solutions, not treading back on the past.
I'm just curious because right now, look, I get the pressure Kevin McCarthy's under. He's trying to get to 218, and it's his right flank that is essentially holding their votes as leverage over him. But the majority was made by Republicans who distanced themselves from Trump, who won on issues like crime, education, inflation, energy, places like New York, Oregon, California, very blue areas. In fact, you can make an argument that the majority was made in districts that Biden carried. When do you expect those members to put the same pressure on McCarthy that the right flank is doing?
Well, they should, because what you're saying is absolutely correct. The world has moved beyond Trump, but there are a certain number of very conservative Republicans who don't seem to have that figured out yet.
Well, let me ask you this, because you were a member of Congress and you saw the Trump effect. The people that show up at your town hall meetings are closer to the base than necessarily the people that provide the 50% plus one to win a general election. My point is, I wonder how many members of Congress are only hearing from the constituents that show up to the meetings, and those that show up are usually the Trump supporters.
Well, my district was a little different because it's R plus God knows what, 16 or something, and some very conservative people who were not happy with me being the first Republican to break from Trump, something which I'm quite proud of right now.
Well, so you understand what some of these folks, I mean, you are willing to put your political career on the line to do that. Many of your former colleagues will not.
Well, see, now that highlights a problem with the entire operation of Congress. For most of these people, it's the best job they'll ever get. Yeah.
Looks like you froze there for a second. Yep. Sorry, your last comment froze there for a second.
Well, I
you were saying the best job they ever got. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these guys, it's the best job they'll ever get, and they cling like a barnacle to a piling to hold on to it instead of trying to serve the people and do the best for our country. The forefathers never would have assumed we would need term limits because no one wanted to serve that long anyway.
And is that what you think is the only solution at this point?
I think it could be one of the solutions. I think return of the fairness doctrine, if you could figure out how to do it in the digital era, would be a good thing. And I think getting rid of these gerrymandered districts, both sides, would be good. So that the contest is in the general, not the primary.
I want to talk a little bit quickly on 2024. I spoke with the former vice president, for quite some time yesterday at the Reagan Library. And his basic pitch is going to be, if you like what we did in the Trump-Pence administration, but you're looking for new leadership, why don't you give me a shot? Is that something that can win a Republican primary in your view?
I think it could be, but it might not be him. Could be him. But I've heard the same thing about Governor Youngkin and about Governor DeSantis, that you can get the same good Republican policies without the baggage of Trump. And I think people want that.
And how do you talk them into getting into this race if it means being subject to Donald Trump attacks?
I think those guys are pretty tough guys, okay? Ron has proven his mettle many times in Florida. And Governor Youngkin was chairman of Carlisle. That's a pretty big job. He's probably plenty used to controversy and difficult situations.
Is there anything Donald Trump could do to win you back? I'm just curious. Or is he, to you, in your mind, forever severed his ability to lead?
No, I wouldn't be for him. I think, first of all, I think any decent Republican would have done most of the things he did. Mm-hmm. I don't particularly consider the Abraham Accords a great foreign policy victory, overturning 70 years of stable two-state policy. I think it was reckless. Mm-hmm. The economic stuff he did, any Republican would have done. So I think we just need a new Republican.
Congressman Francis Rooney, former Republican congressman from Florida. Good to see you. Thanks for coming on and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you, Chuck.
All right. Up next, my one-on-one interview with current Majority Whip, Democratic Congressman Jim Clyburn, on the future of his party and why he wants to seek another term in House leadership. He joins me live after this. Welcome back. As we mentioned earlier, the investigation into former President Trump's role in the events leading up to the January 6th attack is part of what the newly appointed special counsel for Trump investigations will be looking into. In my interview with the former Vice President, Mike Pence, I asked him about January 6th and the part Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, played that day. Mr. Pence had some strong words about how Meadows, a founding member of the House Freedom Caucus, handled who had access to the president. Take a listen. You praised John Kelly for how he managed that Oval Office and managed who came in out of it. How much of what happened on January 6th is on the hands of Mark Meadows?
The president's got to rely on his senior team. Mm-hmm. The term gatekeeper sounds offensive to the American mind. You think of open government and access, but what General John Kelly did when he became White House Chief of Staff, and what frankly all the best White House Chiefs of Staff have done throughout history, is make sure that the only people that get into the Oval Office are people that have the credibility to be there. And make sure that the president understands what they're coming to talk about, so he's in a position to be able to make the decisions that only a president can make. General Kelly created that order, and sadly, when he left, Mick Mulvaney, I think, did his level best as an interim chief of staff to bring that about. But I was disappointed in Mark Meadows' performance as chief of staff, particularly at the end. But from very early on, when it was clear that he had talked the president out of White House coronavirus press briefings, and in a very real sense, I think his tenure as chief of staff did not serve the president well.
It sounds like it's not just on January 6th. Are you saying that a lot of the COVID misinformation that sometimes came out of President Trump's mouth was due to Mark Meadows' lack of gatekeeping?
Well, let's talk about COVID. I have some great chapters.
No, I do want to talk about that, and I plan on it, but I want to ask you about Meadows specifically. Was he a bad gatekeeper then, too?
Well, I've always believed that in a public health emergency, more is more when it comes to information.
Joining me now for our panel, Jake Sermon, co-founder of Punchbowl News, Eugene Robinson, Washington Post columnist, and Danielle Pletka, senior fellow of the American Enterprise Institute. All three are NBC News political contributors. Jake, you've covered Mark Meadows basically from the beginning of his, backbench congressman trying to be influential with the Freedom Caucus, stumbling into being chief of staff. For Mike Pence, that's a strong critique.
Yeah, when Mark Meadows was named to be chief of staff to President Trump, I can't tell you how many Republicans in Congress said this would be a train wreck. And this was before COVID, probably the most delicate emergency.
Well, it was about 2 weeks before COVID, if I remember.
But the rumbling started earlier than that. During a public health emergency, as the former vice president said, you need to be clear, you need to be concise. Good information is key. Mark Meadows trafficked in conspiracy theories for as long as I've known him, and I've known him since he's been in Congress, or from his beginning of his political career. He was disorganized. He shifted from ask to ask on Capitol Hill. This was somebody who was, by the way, I'll just take issue with one thing that Pence said. He said he didn't serve the president well. That might be true from Pence's point of view, but Trump, he did exactly what Trump wanted.
Thank you. And that's the point I was going to make. Yes. This happens all the time with Trump, Danny, where everybody wants to protect Trump. Oh, poor Trump, he was given bad advice, or there was bad lawyers. Isn't Trump the one to pick the bad lawyers? Isn't Trump the one that picks Mark Meadows?
I'm gonna say something. I'm not quite as calm as Mike Pence. But I learned when I came to Washington that people who have bad staff are not great people. They have them.
They attract each other,
well,
is what you're saying?
You hear it on the Hill all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so-and-so, Senator so-and-so, he's just a good man. But that staffer of his, that's a jackass. And they're like, no, he's his jackass. and that's the Trump story, from soup to nuts.
I will say on Capitol Hill, I'm sorry, Gene, but I just want to get this one point in. We always have this discussion, is it the staffer? And then my colleague John Bresnahan always says to me, at some point, the staffer was hired by a member of Congress, and nothing that he or she does is divorced from the person.
The staffer is doing what the principal wants. I mean, that's basically that's why they keep the staffer in place. And I mean, the other thing Meadows did we've learned from the January 6th committee and from what we've heard, is kind of tell everybody what they wanted to hear, and give them the impression that he was on their side, and that's no. I mean, not for a chief of staff at the White House. No, you can't do that.
But there's another important point here. Being a member of Congress is terrible preparation to do any kind of governance. It just is. You have staff. You're engaged in tweeting, you're engaged in showmanship, you're not even engaged anymore in passing bills. We talk about this all the time. Right. And then you go and get a real job, like chief of staff for the president of the... It is work. You are keeping the trains running on time. And he didn't have any idea what he was doing.
And Meadows' biggest flaw as a human being is that he is constantly seeking people's approval. Exactly. And I found that all the time, even with Democrats. He would always say, I'm on his side.
Well, it feels like he had some chip. And look, we all have a chip that drives us.
I have a giant one.
Right. Yeah. I do too. I have multiple chips, so I'm not going to. We all have them. But it seems like he was always concerned he didn't belong, and he wanted to prove that he did. But so then any approval, he sort of almost ran towards.
And it was especially acute during the Trump era, where the entire Republican Party's existence was based on pleasing him.
All right, the special counsel. This feels like Garland was damned if he did, damned if he didn't.
Yeah, I think, I would be surprised if Garland hadn't decided this well in advance, that this is what he was going to do if it looked like Trump's going to run, Biden says he's going to run.
Do you think at all he should have just done this from the get-go? I mean, I was wondering why he didn't do it from the get-go. Well, just got it out of his hands, but I understand, prosecutors don't like to do that.
No, they don't like to do that. And you're Attorney General. You want to be in control. You want, it's your show and your shop, and you want to take responsibility and you want to do it. But in retrospect, maybe you should have.
Danny, I guess the question is, can Trump weaponize this to his benefit? And what I'm curious about is there fatigue in the party? We know there's fatigue in the party to him. Is there fatigue in his base to this, right? And I think we don't know yet.
I think we have no idea. Look, we see the polls that have come out since the election where he has done significantly worse than he did prior to the election. I think also people do get sick and tired of someone who complains constantly about the people who are out to get him. At the end of the day, if you're voting for somebody, yes, I understand, people might believe the conspiracies. They might believe he actually is persecuted. In some instances, he genuinely was persecuted. But if that's all you're about, if every day all you do is whine to the American people about how evil Joe Biden is out to get you, you're going to lose out to the younger, hotter candidates.
Yeah. I will say, but
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
No, I'm not. Look,
sorry, but
you think this could boomerang to his benefit?
Well, I think it pumps up a shrinking base or a shrunken base.
Well, that's it. Pumps up a shrinking base.
Exactly. But for the base, I think it definitely pumps them up. I think it cements their
I can't wait for his first rally
they have with Trump.
I'm curious if he can fill an amphitheater these days.
But I will say my former boss at Politico, John Harris, who you all know, wrote a really good column this morning basically saying it doesn't look like Trump's having fun anymore. Like, when he first ran, there was despite all the disgusting things and false things that he said, there was certainly an element of, man, this guy is having fun in what he's doing.
He was a happy warrior.
Right. Yeah. And if you compare him to Ron DeSantis right now, if you're a Republican voter, I don't know. My crystal ball's always wrong. So DeSantis looks like he's having much more fun than Donald Trump, whose campaign rallies are just full of not lighthearted grievances, heavy-hearted grievances.
Look,
he's exhausting.
If it's true that Trump can no longer fill an amphitheater, then no fun. You know, we can start writing the obit. But if he can, watch him in front of a full house.
No, I do
he
think,
will have fun.
Look, the Republican elites, the conservative media have tried to dump Trump before, only for the voters to say, and Rupert Murdoch to say, okay. You know, right, Danny?
But they haven't had a choice. And they really haven't. I mean, Trump really successfully diminished everyone around him. We still can say, what did he call Marco Rubio? What did he call him?
Little Marco.
Right?
Little Marco.
We could, you know, what do you call Jeb Bush?
Right. Exactly. You're right. We know all the nicknames. Right.
But you know, the sad, Rhonda sanctimonious, it just smacks of sort of being kind of lazy and old, and that really weird racist Glenn Youngkin attack. So,
We got a nose counter here from Capitol Hill. Kevin McCarthy, the path to 218. Is Nancy Pelosi's absence actually make it even more difficult?
Well, two different thoughts here. For him to get to 218 on the speaker vote, he has about let's say the majority's of 221, which is where it seems like it'll be, 221 or 222. So that gives him a 3-vote majority to get the
Okay, so there's Gates, Biggs,
and Bob Good, and Ken Buck, and
you just got more than
Matt Rosendale from Montana. All of these folks have expressed some level of discomfort. A few different thoughts here. Number one, you're starting to see the Trump-aligned conservatives, people who don't like Kevin McCarthy, come out for McCarthy, saying, like, what is your plan here? What are you doing otherwise? And, you know, show me why he shouldn't be speaker. He's the only one who's close to 218. We'll see if that's important. If there's no other alternative and the House can't gavel into session, because, by the way, there are other people, not conservatives, who say Kevin's the only person I will vote for. Moderates who say that. Right. So there's push and pull here. I think and that should be kept in mind. If he is speaker, which I don't know if he will be, but let's just play the game that he is speaker, it will be more difficult for him to pass bills without Nancy Pelosi in the House on the things that need to get done to govern. Because Nancy Pelosi, love her or hate her, is the most effective legislative politician of our lifetime. And she would corral her
for
Joe Biden, not for Kevin McCarthy.
Right. Her cranky progressives. She'll figure out how to get them.
That's right.
Kevin McCarthy may not have that kind of power.
He will not.
Right. Jake, thank you. Danny and Jake, good to see you both. After the break, the future of the Democratic Party with Majority Whip Jim Clyburn and why he just launched his bid to remain in House leadership. Our interview is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. New York Congressman Hakeem Jeffries announced his bid officially earlier today to replace Speaker Nancy Pelosi as the leader of the Democratic caucus. If successful, Jeffries would be the first black party leader in congressional history. And as we celebrate 75 years of Meet the Press, we are diving into our archives and remembering some barrier-breaking moments throughout our history, including Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, who in 1968 became the first African-American woman to be elected to Congress. And in 1972, Congresswoman Chisholm appeared on Meet the Press as she was exploring a history-making White House bid. Take a listen.
I think you have to recognize, first of all, gentlemen, you have to really recognize I'm doing something in this country that's never really been done before. It's a question of inculcation, reorientation, and education. Never before in this country, ever since the inception of the Republic, have you had a woman seriously running for the presidency. I'm not talking about someone nominating someone at the convention as a mere gesture of symbolism and tokenism. I'm talking about someone that has been going out in the highways and byways for the past 7.5 months and saying to the American people that if indeed this is a multifaceted society, that Mrs. Chisholm also can be considered a person that can run for the presidency of this country. I was breaking a tradition in which only white males have only been the gentlemen in this country that have guided the ship of state. So you don't expect people, black, white, men, or women, to suddenly overcome a tradition that has been steeped ever since the inception of this republic. So I understand that. I've broken the ice.
Shirley Chisholm there from Meet the Press 1972. I'm joined now by House Democratic Whip Jim Clyburn, who's right now the #3 leader in the Democratic caucus, and he's thrown his support behind the next generation of leaders and has also announced his bid for assistant Democratic leader today. Congressman Clyburn, it is good to see you.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, I want to start with just your reaction to the ascension, or the likely ascension, nothing is official yet, of Hakeem Jeffries, and what that means to you?
It means a whole lot to me. I, as you know, was born and raised here in South Carolina. I've been working all of my life, starting out way back as a teenager, trying to make sure that I do the kinds of things that need to be done to build a foundation upon young African Americans can stand. And I see Hakeem Jeffries as someone ready to stand upon that foundation and to move all of our efforts to higher heights. And that's why I'm supporting him. I'm supporting this team of leaders. Yeah. We have a white woman running for whip, a job that I enjoyed, and I think she is fantastic for, and a Latina running for chair of our caucus. They will be the triumvirate that hopefully will take us back to the majority in 2024. And I'm supporting them.
Well, you're not retiring anytime soon. I know that. Tell me why you want to continue to stay in leadership in the capacity that you plan to run on.
Well, you know, I grew up in the parsonage. My father was a fundamentalist minister, and I am guided in life by Scripture. And, of course, the young is called to do the work because they have the strength to do it. The old, because of the knowledge and experience and all of that. And I've talked with these leaders, and we want to have a smooth, evolutionary transition to the future. We don't want anything to be so abrupt so as not to bring along all the forces that need to be. And I have been a bridge builder all of my life, and all of this is building a bridge to the future.
By running, Joe Negese had this position. He was going to run for it. Is it somebody that you'd like to see him to run for another position? Or is this more about helping out the top three?
Well, I think a lot of this is supposition. Joe Negese is one of the people that I have mentored. I have worked very closely with him. I spent a lot of time with Joe Negese on yesterday and the day before. And we have worked on a process that we think will allow us to be successful and to bring all the elements together and to keep all the elements involved in the process. And I'm doing all I can to this assistant Joe Negese, Joyce Beatty, and others who are pursuing a future in our party. And I'm here to do what I can to help them.
I'm going to get your take on Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise. If they are speaker and leader and trying to corral, you've being whip, I assume every once in a while you worked with Scalise and his team. Are they going to be able to govern? Is this going to be a Congress that's going to be able to get the basics done?
Well, I don't know whether they will. I know that they can. All it takes is to be willing to respect everybody's input. The fact of the matter is, we had at one point 221 when I was whipping, so the same number that seemed to be projected for them. We've also had 222, but there's a big difference in having 232 and 222. If you got 222, you had better pay attention to everybody's needs, everybody's aspirations, and trying to move the country along. We cannot have all this acrimony, all of these investigations, all of this name calling. We should be about what is of interest to the American people. What do we do to keep this great country on its pursuit of a more perfect union? And you cannot do that if you give in to the edges. Bring this country together. Yeah. And we can do it. Whether or not they will, I don't know.
And like I said, you know this Republican leadership team as well as you can, being in the position you've been in. How would you advise President Biden to figure out, look, you got to do some things together. They ran on something. They ran on energy. Let's look at the issues they ran on to win their majority: energy, crime, and the economy. What would you advise President Biden to work with House Republicans on?
Well, he's been working with House Republicans. We didn't get any of their votes for our Rescue Act because they were still in the campaign mode. Remember, the Rescue Act passed 6 weeks into administration and just about 2 months after the insurrection. But we did get bipartisan support for the infrastructure bill. We got bipartisan support for the CHIPS and Science Act. And we should have had bipartisan support for the Inflation Reduction Act. And, of course, we got bipartisan support for the PAC Act to take care of our veterans. So out of the 5 major bills we passed, we had bipartisan support for 3 of them. So Joe Biden has been doing exactly what he needs to do. He has expressed an interest in reaching across party lines on every piece of legislation. And I think that that's what paid off at the polls. People love Joe Biden's his approach as well as his agenda. And I think he'll keep doing the same thing, keep the lines of communication open, but don't engage in the name calling and allowing the presidency to devolve to the point that it was in the previous administration.
Congressman Jim Clyburn, Democrat from South Carolina, on current number 3 in Democratic leadership. Really appreciate you coming on, sharing your perspective. Have a
Thank you very much for having me.
Good Thanksgiving break. Still to come, what is going on inside Twitter? Will it survive the Thanksgiving holiday? Major turmoil and a mass exodus at the social media giant after Elon Musk's takeover. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Twitter's tumultuous month has gotten even messier in the last 24 hours, with the company closing all of its offices until Monday amid another wave of employee resignations. The departures came after owner Elon Musk gave an ultimatum to employees to commit to hardcore work in an environment or resign. Well, that has fueled speculation, including on Twitter itself, that the social media company could be on the brink of collapse. I'm joined now by NBC News senior reporter Ben Collins. And Ben, it seems like every 30 minutes, Elon Musk throws something at Twitter that's still operating, still functional. Maybe it's a driverless car that we're waiting for it to see what happens when it runs out of gas. But what's happening here, and is this really about to truly collapse?
Yeah, so another 1,200 or so employees left. This was a company that had 7,500 employees last month, and now it's down to somewhere around 1,000. We don't know if it's more or less than that.
Because he had laid off half the staff, right? Go through the math for us a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then today, even though these offices are supposed to be closed, he said, everybody come to the 10th floor today at one of these offices. And if you're not in town, you should think about taking a flight here by 2 p.m. He sent that email at 8:30 a.m. So this guy doesn't really want these people working here anymore. It's pretty clear, but he's pretty clear about that point. What he wants the site to do is kind of unclear. He keeps talking about a hardcore work environment in Twitter 2.0, but he doesn't really have a plan. He's reneged on his first major initiative after it crashed and burned, which was these verified check marks. I don't know where this is going, but I think the generous word would be mercurial for Elon, or, I don't know where he is.
Where's Jack Dorsey in all this? I mean, his fingerprints are more on this than maybe he wants to admit.
Yeah, he's creating a separate service called Blue Sky, which could effectively replace Twitter and a bunch of other things. And he endorsed the concept of Elon doing this stuff and bringing the light of consciousness and all this other stuff that he was saying into the world. But he's nowhere to be found right now. Elon is doing something by himself here with the help of a bunch of VC friends in Silicon Valley. The average user is not really in his mind right now.
I think about Sam Bankman-Fried, and I think about Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey. Man, who are these guys? And is this an emperor has no clothes moment?
Yeah, I think it is for a lot of these tech people who think they can run anything. Maybe they did one thing right. They think they can run anything. In this case, it's just not working out at Twitter as it was supposed to. And, Sam Bankman-Fried was selling imaginary money, so it's hard to Like, that's a whole different situation, but it's still an emperor wears no clothes situation.
Is there any emergency exit ramp for Elon, selling it to Google, selling it Twitter to Amazon?
He could do it. I think it would be smart to do it, but I think the ego is in the way of the money-making operation here.
Ben Collins, sadly, I'm out of time, but I'm not out of questions. Appreciate the few minutes you gave me there. And thank you all for being with us this hour. We'll be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And as we've mentioned, you can catch my entire interview with the former Vice President Mike Pence on Meet the Press this Sunday on your local NBC News station. Don't miss it. Trust me, he has not said things to anybody else that he has said to us that you'll see Sunday. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.